He almost said no when the message came in. It was late in the evening and he had just returned home from work, tired and not in the mood to meet anyone new. Blind dates had never worked for him before. They usually ended with awkward silence, forced smiles, and polite goodbyes that meant nothing. Still, his coworker had been very persistent. She said this woman was different. She said they would get along well. After several reminders and a long sigh, he finally agreed, more to stop the messages than out of real interest. The cafe was small and quiet, tucked between two old buildings on a busy street. It was the kind of place people chose when they wanted to talk without being disturbed. Soft music played in the background and warm yellow lights made the room feel calm. He arrived a little early and chose a table near the window. As he sat down, he checked his phone again, rereading the short message that described what she would be wearing. He told himself to stay relaxed. It was just coffee, nothing more. A few minutes later, he saw her walk in. She looked confident, well-dressed, and sure of herself. Her steps were steady, and her smile was quick and practiced. She scanned the room, spotted him, and walked over without hesitation. She greeted him as if they already knew each other, speaking with ease and energy. At first, he felt relieved. At least she seemed comfortable. That usually made things easier. They ordered their drinks and the conversation began smoothly. She talked about her job, her busy schedule, and the places she had visited. Her stories were exciting, full of details that made her life sound impressive. She laughed often and spoke with confidence. He listened, nodding and smiling, occasionally adding a comment or asking a question. On the surface, everything seemed fine. Still, deep inside, he felt a small sense of distance, as if something invisible stood between them. As the minutes passed, he noticed little things. When he asked simple questions, like where she grew up or how long she had lived in the city, her answers were unclear. She would change the topic quickly or give vague responses that did not really explain anything. He told himself not to judge too quickly. Some people were private. Some people took time to open up. He decided to let it go. The waitress came to take their order. She was a young woman with kind eyes and a calm voice. She smiled politely and wrote everything down. As she walked away, he noticed her glance back at their table just for a moment. He thought nothing of it. Cafes were busy places and waitresses noticed everything. It did not seem important. The conversation continued, but he felt himself becoming quieter. His date spoke a lot, often guiding the discussion back to herself. She talked about past relationships, but only in a way that made her seem perfect and misunderstood. Everyone else, according to her, had failed her in some way. He listened carefully, trying to understand. Something about the way she spoke felt rehearsed, like she had told these stories many times before. When their drinks arrived, the waitress set the cups down gently. Again, she paused slightly longer than needed. This time, he clearly noticed her eyes. They were not curious. They were concerned. She looked at him as if she wanted to say something, then quickly looked away and walked off. His heart skipped for a second. He tried to tell himself he was imagining things, but the feeling stayed. His date noticed his distraction and asked if everything was okay. He smiled and said yes. He did not want to seem rude or strange. Still, the comfortable mood from earlier had faded. He began to feel uneasy, though he could not explain why. Nothing bad had happened. Nothing wrong had been said. Yet the air around the table felt heavier than before. As time went on, the waitress returned again, this time to ask if they needed anything else. His date responded sharply, saying they were fine and did not need to be interrupted. The tone surprised him. It was sudden and harsh. The waitress apologized quietly and stepped away. Once again, she glanced back, and this time the look was unmistakable. It was a look of warning. He shifted in his seat, feeling confused. He tried to focus on the conversation, but his thoughts kept returning to the strange behavior around them. His date continued talking, unaware or unconcerned. She spoke about plans, goals, and future dreams as if they were already close. It felt rushed, too fast. He found himself nodding, but his mind was elsewhere. He excused himself to go to the restroom, needing a moment to think. As he stood up, he noticed the waitress nearby. Their eyes met briefly. She looked as if she wanted to speak, but she did not. He walked away, his thoughts racing. Why did this feel so wrong? Why did a simple coffee feel so heavy? When he returned to the table, his date was checking her phone, her expression tight. She smiled quickly when she saw him and continued as if nothing had happened. He sat down, trying to calm himself. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was overthinking. He reminded himself again that it was just a blind date. The waitress came back one more time. She placed a small plate on the table and quietly adjusted the cups. As she did, her hand moved slightly, almost by accident. When she walked away, he noticed something under his coffee cup, a small folded piece of paper. His heart began to beat faster. He looked up at his date. She was busy talking, unaware of what had just happened. Slowly, carefully, he picked up the cup and took the paper. He slipped it into his pocket without drawing attention. His hands felt cold. His mind filled with questions. Why would a waitress leave him a note? What could be so important that she would take such a risk? He tried to stay calm, but his focus was gone. Every word his date spoke felt distant. He nodded automatically, waiting for a chance to read the note. Finally, she stood up and said she needed to step outside to take a call. As soon as she walked away, he pulled the paper from his pocket. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. The message was short, written quickly but very clear. It said, "She's not who you think. Please be careful." The quiet cafe around him felt different now. What had started as a simple blind date had become something else entirely, and he knew that whatever came next, this night was not going to end the way he had expected. He folded the note again and slid it back into his pocket. His heart was beating faster than before, but he forced his face to remain calm. He did not want to act suddenly or make the situation uncomfortable. The cafe felt quieter now, even though nothing around him had changed. Every sound seemed sharper, every movement more noticeable. He took a slow breath and told himself to think clearly. When his date returned to the table, she smiled as if nothing unusual had happened. She sat down and continued talking, picking up the conversation from where she had left off. Her voice was steady, confident, and smooth. If someone were watching from a distance, everything would look completely normal. But for him, nothing felt normal anymore. He listened carefully now more than before. Every sentence she spoke seemed important. He noticed how she avoided certain details and how her stories often shifted slightly when she repeated them. A place she mentioned earlier sounded different now. A timeline she had given before no longer matched. These were small things, but together they formed a pattern that made his chest feel tight. He tried asking simple questions again, gently and politely. He asked about her work, hoping to understand it better. She answered quickly, using big ideas but few clear facts. When he asked how long she had been doing that job, she paused for just a second too long, then changed the subject with a laugh. She joked about how people always asked boring questions. He smiled back, but inside, his doubt grew. The waitress returned to refill their water. This time she did not look at his date at all. Her eyes went straight to him, just for a brief moment. There was concern there and something else too, like urgency. She placed the glass down and walked away without saying much. His date noticed the silence and rolled her eyes, making a small comment about poor service. He did not respond. He began to feel uncomfortable with the way his date spoke about others. She described people from her past as foolish, selfish, or ungrateful. She never accepted any blame herself. According to her, she was always the one who had tried the hardest. He wondered quietly what those people would say if they were there. The note stayed heavy in his pocket. He could feel it every time he moved. He wanted to understand more, but he did not want to jump to conclusions. The waitress might be mistaken. There could be a simple explanation. Still, the feeling in his chest told him to stay alert. As they talked, his date began to ask more personal questions. She wanted to know about his income, his living situation, and his plans for the future. The questions came quickly, one after another, and she listened closely to his answers. It felt less like a conversation and more like an interview. He answered carefully, sharing less than he normally would. He noticed how her mood shifted depending on his responses. When his answers matched what she seemed to expect, she smiled warmly. When they did not, her expression tightened just for a moment. These changes were small, but they were there. He wondered if he had missed such signs in the past with other people. The cafe began to fill with more customers, but the table still felt isolated. The warm lights no longer felt comforting. He felt like he was sitting in a bubble, separate from everyone else. His thoughts were loud, but he kept his voice calm and steady. At one point, his date leaned forward and spoke in a lower voice. She talked about how hard it was to trust people and how often others disappointed her. She said she hoped this time would be different. Her words sounded emotional, but something about them felt practiced, like lines repeated many times before. He nodded, unsure how to respond. The waitress passed by again, carrying a tray. As she walked past their table, she dropped a napkin near his side. She bent down quickly to pick it up and whispered softly, so quietly that only he could hear. "Please be careful," she said, then stood up and walked away as if nothing had happened. His stomach tightened. This was no longer a misunderstanding. The waitress was clearly trying to warn him. He looked at his date, who was scrolling through her phone, unaware of the quiet moment that had just passed. He felt torn. Part of him wanted to leave immediately. Another part wanted answers. He decided to slow things down. He leaned back in his chair and changed the topic to something neutral. He spoke about the cafe, the weather, and simple daily things. His date seemed less interested now. She checked her phone more often and sighed softly. The energy between them shifted again. He noticed how she reacted when he did not give her his full attention. She asked if he was distracted. He said he was just tired from work. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She suggested they leave soon and go somewhere else, somewhere quieter. The suggestion made him uncomfortable. He said he preferred to stay where they were. The tension grew, though no one else could see it. His date's words became sharper. She complained about the cafe, the noise, and the service. She glanced around as if measuring the room. He wondered what she was thinking. He excused himself again, saying he needed some air. He stood up slowly and walked toward the front of the cafe. His hands were slightly shaky, but his mind felt clearer. Near the counter, he found the waitress. She looked relieved when she saw him approach. He spoke softly, keeping his voice low. He asked her what she meant by the note. At first, she hesitated. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Then she explained that she had seen the woman before, more than once. Each time, she was with someone different. Each time, the situation ended badly. She said the woman often told stories that did not match and used different names. She said she had seen people leave the cafe looking confused, upset, or deeply disappointed. She had never spoken up before, but something about him made her decide she could not stay silent. She said she did not want to scare him, only to warn him. He thanked her quietly. His chest felt heavy, but his thoughts were clearer now. He realized that his uneasy feeling had been trying to protect him from the start. He had just ignored it. When he returned to the table, his date noticed his serious expression. She asked if something was wrong. He took a deep breath and decided to be honest but calm. He told her he felt the evening was moving too fast. He said he noticed some things that confused him and that he wanted to slow down. Her reaction was immediate. Her face changed, and her voice grew defensive. She accused him of overthinking and said people always misunderstood her. She laughed, but it sounded forced. He stayed quiet, watching her carefully. The silence between them grew uncomfortable. Finally, she stood up suddenly, saying she did not like being judged. She grabbed her bag and told him he was just like everyone else. Without waiting for a response, she walked out of the cafe. He stayed seated, his heart pounding, watching the door close behind her. The cafe noise returned, and the moment passed as if nothing had happened. The waitress came over and gently placed the bill on the table, telling him it was already taken care of. He thanked her again, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. As he left the cafe, the cool air hit his face. He took a deep breath and looked up at the night sky. He realized how close he had come to ignoring his instincts. What felt like a small warning had likely saved him from much bigger trouble. The night was not over yet, but one thing was clear. This experience had changed the way he would listen to his inner voice forever. He did not go straight home after leaving the cafe. His mind was too full and his heart was still racing. He walked slowly down the street, letting the cool night air calm him. Cars passed by, lights flashing, people laughing as they walked in groups, all living their own stories. To them, it was just another normal evening. For him, it felt like something important had just happened, something that needed time to understand. As he walked, the conversation from the cafe played again and again in his head. He remembered the way she had smiled, the way her stories had shifted, and how quickly her mood had changed when he asked simple questions. He also remembered the waitress's eyes, full of concern, and the quiet warning in her voice. The more he thought about it, the clearer everything became. The strange feeling he had ignored at the beginning now made sense. When he finally reached his apartment, he turned on the lights and sat down on the couch without even taking off his shoes. The room felt quiet and empty. He pulled the folded note from his pocket again and placed it on the table in front of him. The words were simple, but they carried weight. He wondered how many times the waitress had wanted to warn someone before but stayed silent. He wondered how many people had ignored signs and paid a price for it later. He made himself a glass of water and sat there for a long time, just thinking. He felt relief that the evening had ended before anything worse could happen, but he also felt uneasy. If this woman had done this before, how many others had been affected? How many people had trusted her words and believed her stories? The thought made him uncomfortable. Later that night, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and saw a message from her. It was short and sharp. She said he had embarrassed her and wasted her time. She said he had been cold and judgmental. He read the message twice, then set the phone down. He did not reply. Arguing would not change anything. He felt that answering would only pull him back into something he wanted to leave behind. The next morning, he woke up feeling tired but clear-headed. The events of the night before still felt fresh, but the confusion was gone. He went through his normal routine, showering, getting dressed, and preparing for work. Still, the memory stayed with him. As he left his apartment, he noticed how alert he felt, as if his senses had been sharpened by the experience. At work, his coworker approached him with a curious smile. She asked how the blind date had gone. He hesitated, then decided to keep his answer simple. He said it had not worked out. She looked surprised and asked why. He shrugged and said sometimes things just did not feel right. She nodded slowly, accepting the answer, though he could tell she was disappointed. Throughout the day, he found himself thinking about trust. He thought about how easy it was to be impressed by confident words and charming behavior. He thought about how often people believed what they wanted to believe, especially when they felt lonely or hopeful. The experience made him more aware of how careful one needed to be without becoming cold or closed off. That evening, as he was leaving work, he received another message from the same woman. This time, her tone was different. She said she had overreacted. She said she hoped they could talk again and clear things up. She wrote that misunderstandings happened and that people deserved second chances. He stared at the message for a long time. Part of him felt tempted to reply, to ask questions, to understand more. But another part of him remembered the warning, the stories that did not add up, and the sudden anger when he tried to slow things down. He realized that the urge to respond came from curiosity, not trust. He decided not to answer. Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Still, the experience stayed with him. Small moments reminded him of it, like seeing couples in cafes or hearing friends talk about dating. He noticed how often people ignored their instincts in favor of hope. He wondered how many problems could be avoided if people listened more carefully to their inner voice. One evening, about a week later, he returned to the same cafe. He did not plan it at first. He was just walking and found himself turning down the familiar street. The place looked the same as before, warm lights glowing through the windows. He went inside and ordered a coffee, choosing a table near the counter this time. The waitress recognized him immediately. Her face showed surprise, then relief. She came over and asked how he was doing. He told her he was fine and thanked her again for what she had done. She smiled softly and said she was glad he had listened. She explained that she had worried about him after that night, wondering if she had done the right thing. They spoke quietly for a few minutes. She told him she had seen the woman again with someone else just 2 days after his date. She said the woman had acted the same way, confident and charming, telling familiar stories. The waitress had not said anything that time. She said it was not always easy to step in, even when something felt wrong. He understood. It was not easy to get involved in other people's lives. He told her she had done more than she realized. She nodded, looking thoughtful, and went back to her work. As he sat there drinking his coffee, he felt a sense of closure. The cafe no longer felt tense or heavy. It was just a place again, filled with quiet conversations and soft music. He realized that the experience had given him something valuable, not fear, but awareness. Later that night, as he walked home, he thought about how easily life could change with a single decision. Saying yes to a blind date had led him to a moment that could have gone very differently. A simple note, a quiet warning, and his choice to listen had changed the outcome. He also thought about the importance of speaking up. The waitress had taken a risk by warning him, not knowing how he would react. Her courage reminded him that sometimes doing the right thing meant stepping out of comfort, even for a stranger. Before going to bed, he deleted the messages from his phone and blocked the number. It was not an angry decision. It was a calm one. He felt no need to explain himself anymore. He trusted his judgment now. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he felt tired but peaceful. The confusion and tension from that night were gone. In their place was a quiet confidence. He knew he could still trust people, but he would also trust himself. He would listen when something felt wrong, even if he could not explain it right away. The blind date that had started as an ordinary evening had turned into a lesson he would carry with him for a long time. It had shown him that sometimes the most important warnings came softly, from unexpected places, and that paying attention could make all the difference. The days after that felt calmer on the surface, but something inside him had changed. He moved through his routine with more awareness than before. Simple moments felt sharper, clearer. He noticed people's tone, their pauses, the way their words matched or did not match their actions. It was not fear guiding him, but understanding. One afternoon, while sitting alone during lunch, he received an unexpected email. It was from someone he did not recognize at first. The subject line was short and confusing. When he opened it, his heart tightened. It was from the same woman. She had found his work email through a shared contact. This time her message was longer and calmer. She wrote that she felt misunderstood and hurt. She said she had been going through a difficult phase in life and did not mean to come across the wrong way. She asked if he would meet her once more, just to talk. He stared at the screen for a long time. The words were gentle, almost careful. A week earlier, this message might have made him question himself. Now, he read it differently. He noticed how the message focused on her feelings, her struggles, and her need to explain herself. There was no real acknowledgement of his discomfort, only a request for another chance. He closed the email without replying, not because he felt angry, but because he felt sure. He realized that clarity did not always come with loud answers. Sometimes it arrived quietly when the noise finally settled. That evening, he met a close friend for a walk. They talked about work, daily stress, and small plans for the future. Eventually, the conversation turned to relationships. His friend shared stories of confusing dates and mixed signals. He listened carefully, then shared his own experience for the first time in full. As he spoke, he noticed how easy it was to explain everything now. The confusion he once felt had turned into understanding. His friend listened closely and shook his head in disbelief. He said it was good that someone had warned him. He said not everyone was so lucky. Hearing that made him appreciate the situation even more. Over the next few days, small details continued to appear, almost as if the experience was still unfolding. A mutual acquaintance mentioned hearing strange stories about the same woman, stories that did not line up. Another coworker casually mentioned that a friend of a friend had also gone on a date with her and felt something was off. None of it was dramatic, none of it was shocking, but together it confirmed what he already knew. Instead of feeling upset, he felt thankful. Thankful that the situation had ended early. Thankful that he had listened. Thankful that someone had chosen to speak up. One evening he returned to the cafe again, not out of habit this time, but with intention. The place felt familiar now, almost comforting. He ordered the same drink as before and sat quietly, watching the people around him. Couples laughed softly. Friends leaned close, sharing stories. Life moved forward, unaware of the quiet lessons happening beneath the surface. The waitress noticed him again and smiled. When she had a moment, she came over and asked how things were going. He told her everything was good. He told her he felt lighter. She seemed relieved to hear that. She said sometimes she wondered if getting involved had been the right thing to do. He told her it absolutely was. He explained how that small note had changed the direction of his choices, how it had reminded him to trust himself, how it had helped him avoid something that could have grown complicated and painful. The waitress listened quietly, her hands resting on the counter. When he finished, she smiled in a way that showed she had needed to hear that too. As he left the cafe, he realized something important. Warnings did not always come from people close to us. Sometimes they came from strangers who expected nothing in return. Sometimes they came in the smallest forms, like a folded piece of paper or a whispered sentence. A few days later, he received one final message from the woman. It was brief. She said she hoped he was well and wished him luck. There was no anger in the words this time. He read it once, then deleted it. He felt no need to respond. Closure, he realized, did not always require conversation. Life slowly filled the space that the experience had left behind. He focused more on his hobbies, spent time with friends, and allowed himself to relax again. He did not rush into anything new. He did not feel pressured to replace what had never truly begun. He was content with letting things happen naturally. One weekend, while helping a friend move, he met new people. The conversations were simple and genuine. There was no performance, no rush, no pressure. He found himself enjoying the ease of it. For the first time in a while, he felt open without feeling exposed. Later that night, as he lay in bed, he reflected on how much he had learned without realizing it at first. He had learned that charm did not equal honesty. That confidence did not always mean stability. That discomfort was not something to ignore or push away. It was often a signal asking to be understood. He also learned something about himself. He learned that he was capable of setting boundaries calmly, that he did not need dramatic exits or harsh words to protect his peace. He could simply choose not to continue. The experience had not made him suspicious of everyone. Instead, it had made him more respectful of his own feelings. He knew now that trust grew slowly and should never be rushed. And when something felt wrong, it was okay to step back, even if others did not understand. As the weeks passed, the memory of that night softened. It no longer felt heavy or tense. It became just another chapter, one that carried meaning but no pain. He felt stronger for having gone through it, not because he faced danger but because he listened. He realized that not every lesson came wrapped in big moments. Some arrived quietly, through simple choices and small acts of courage. A waitress choosing to care. A man choosing to pause. A note choosing the right moment to be read. By the time he fell asleep that night, he felt grateful. Grateful for the warning, grateful for the clarity, and grateful that sometimes what looks like a disaster at first is actually a turning point leading you away from something you were never meant to face. Time moved forward quietly after that. Weeks passed, then months, and the memory of the blind date slowly settled into the background of his life. It did not disappear, but it no longer felt sharp or heavy. Instead, it became something softer, like a lesson folded neatly and placed away, ready to be remembered when needed. He noticed changes in himself that he had not planned. He became more patient with people, but also more honest with his own feelings. When something felt uncomfortable, he no longer pushed the feeling aside. He paused and listened. This did not make his life smaller. In fact, it made it feel more balanced. One evening, while sitting alone at home, he thought about how easily that night could have gone in another direction. If he had ignored the note, if he had laughed it off, if he had stayed quiet to avoid awkwardness. Small choices, he realized, often decided much bigger outcomes. It was not about fear, it was about awareness. He also thought about the waitress often, not in a dramatic way but with quiet respect. She had no reason to help him. She gained nothing from speaking up. Still, she had chosen to act. Her small decision reminded him that kindness did not always come from close friends or family. Sometimes it came from strangers who simply paid attention. One afternoon, he found himself helping a coworker who seemed stressed. Normally, he might have stayed silent and minded his own business. This time, he asked if everything was okay. The coworker hesitated, then opened up about a personal problem. As he listened, he realized how important it was to feel seen. That moment made him think again about how the waitress must have felt watching him that night, deciding whether to speak or stay quiet. Life continued to bring new moments, small and ordinary. He went out with friends, worked late some nights, and enjoyed simple weekends. He did not rush into new relationships. There was no pressure to replace what never really began. He trusted that the right connections would come naturally, without force. One day, while walking past the cafe again, he decided to stop in. It had become a familiar place not because of what happened there but because of what he learned. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window. The waitress noticed him and smiled. This time their interaction was light and normal. No tension, no concern, just a friendly exchange. Before leaving, he thanked her once more. He told her that her action had stayed with him. She looked surprised and a little embarrassed. She said she was just glad things turned out okay. They shared a quiet smile, and that was enough. No long conversation was needed. As he walked away, he felt a sense of closure. Not because everything had been explained, but because it no longer needed to be. Some stories did not end with clear answers. They ended with understanding. Later that week, he met someone new through a friend. The meeting was simple, no big expectations, no pressure. They talked easily about everyday things. There was no rush to impress, no need to perform. He noticed how calm he felt, how natural the conversation flowed. It felt different from the start. He did not compare this new meeting to the blind date. He did not analyze every word. He simply stayed present. That was another thing he had learned. Not every situation required deep judgment. Some only required honesty and patience. As time went on, he realized that the blind date disaster was not really a disaster at all. It was a moment of redirection. It had shown him the value of listening, both to others and to himself. It had reminded him that discomfort was not something to fear, but something to understand. He also learned that being polite did not mean ignoring his own boundaries. That being kind did not mean agreeing to everything. He could be respectful and still say no. He could be calm and still protect his peace. One quiet night, as he sat on his balcony watching the city lights, he reflected on how much growth could come from a single evening. A night that started with low expectations and ended with an unexpected lesson. A night that could have been forgotten, but instead became meaningful. He thought about how many people walk through life ignoring small signs, hoping things would work out on their own. He understood that hope was important, but awareness mattered just as much. The balance between the two was what kept a person grounded. He did not feel anger toward the woman from the blind date. He did not wish her harm or failure. He simply accepted that their paths were not meant to cross again. Letting go, he realized, was easier when there was understanding instead of blame. As he prepared for sleep that night, he felt content. Not excited, not worried, just calm. His life was not perfect, but it felt honest. He trusted himself more now. He trusted his instincts without letting them control him. The story of the blind date became something he shared only when it felt right, not as a warning filled with fear, but as a reminder filled with awareness. A reminder that sometimes the most important voices were the quiet ones. A reminder that listening could change everything. In the end, what stayed with him the most was not the confusion or the tension. It was the clarity that followed. The understanding that even uncomfortable moments could lead to growth, that even near mistakes could become lessons. And so, life continued, steady and open. He moved forward with a little more wisdom, a little more patience, and a deeper respect for the small signals that guided him. What once looked like a blind date disaster had quietly become one of the most valuable experiences of his life.